patience, but here we are. So if you're like me, even sometimes losing your keys as you're trying to get out of the house can be extraordinarily frustrating. And not to mention that right now we're at what some would say an unprecedented time of losing jobs, losing lifestyle, losing the way that we used to connect with one another. Many of us throughout our lives have lost parts of our health. And also many of us have struggled with probably losing someone we love. Not to mention that on the daily, each moment, we're faced with losing different parts of our identity. If you don't think that's true, if you've ever journaled, head back to one of your journals from 10 years ago and just look at the things that you were thinking, and the things you were writing about, and see how they're no longer particularly present. And so the Buddha reminds us that loss is actually one of the 8 worldly conditions or concerns. And these 8 conditions and concerns are attachments and aversions that tempt us and keep us in the cycle of suffering. And they're happiness and suffering, or pleasure and pain, fame and insignificance, praise and blame, and then gain and loss. So what is loss? Shanti Davis, the Buddhist monk and philosopher and poet from the 8th century, he shares this quote when reflecting on loss. Loss is all that I possess and I use, is like the fleeting vision of a dream. It fades into the realm of memory, and fading will be seen no more. And so we have this beautiful description, and as well, the Oxford Dictionary put very, very simply is just saying, loss is the fact or process of losing something or someone. So loss is dependent on the idea of us thinking we have something, and then there's a change and we don't have it anymore in our point of view. And the change and the very nature of change reveals to us what the Buddha shares with us, which is the idea that all conditioned things are impermanent. And they are impermanent, and he says specifically, impermanent are all component things. They arise and cease. That is their nature. And I think that this is something that we kind of all know when we reflect on it, right? There was a presentation, now there's not. You know, it was warm, and now it's rather chilly here this morning in New York. But not just looking at this as a philosophy, but an actual practice. Joseph Goldstein, to me, kind of a wizard of mindfulness, shares impermanence is the constant, basic, universal truth of change. It is both a process of continual loss in which things exist and then disappear. And it is also a process of continuous rebirth and creativity in which things that do not exist suddenly appear. And the last quote I'll share here about impermanence is Heraclitus, the Greek philosopher. And what I love about this one is, well, I'll let you hear it first. There is no static being, no unchanging substring. Change, movement is Lord of the universe. Everything is in a state of becoming and continual flux. Lord of the universe. So we again get this idea that there are these ungovernable laws, natural laws that exist in this world that we exist in. And so the Buddha tells us that, yeah, impermanence exists, and that's suffering. Of the 3 different kinds of suffering, suffering from pain, suffering from that lack of groundedness, but also just there's suffering from the very fact that everything is always changing. And not only does he share that with us, but he says, let me get this here. He says, yes, they come into being and pass away. Release from them is bliss supreme. Bliss supreme. So that sounds pretty nice. That's the idea of being able to head into enlightenment. So impermanence is everywhere. And if we can see that as a practice, and instead of rejecting it, there's the possibility of liberation. And so here, what I was showing on this next slide is just some examples that we can reflect on. And in your follow-up email, you'll get the slides, and you can see that there's actually quite a bit of change that we can see on the Earth and the amount of ice. If you take a look at a zoomed up picture, there's a big change. There was around 279 billion tons of ice per year have been lost just between 1993 and 2019. That's an average of 279 billion tons per year. So we can see that on the macro scale, yes, things are changing. And on the micro scale, for a toddler or a young person, there are about 100,000 neurons per minute that are firing. Now, they're a little bit fewer for all of us as we've aged, but there's still a lot of movement that's happening within the body all the time. And so if we know that this is true, how can we, the question becomes, how can we relate to this truth of impermanence, to this truth of loss? That becomes the only thing that we really have control over. And so there are three things that I'd like to explore. Compassion, and that's the cultivation of the seeds of loving kindness. Mindfulness, create a mindful relationship or a conscious relationship to loss. And insight, noticing the impermanent nature of all things. And I do just want to say, loss by no means is easy. And I want to preface this with, there's obviously a wide degree of loss, from being upset that there's no more ice cream when you look at the bottom of the dish, to losing the loss of a loved one. And so as we move forward with these tools, I think a great mantra to kind of proceed with is being where you are with that loss and acknowledging that there is that wide range. And as Sharon Salzberg says, in something I take with me, some things just hurt. Some things just hurt. And that's been a real guiding light throughout various moments for me. So as we explore the first one, compassion, Rinpoche, a Tibetan Buddhist monk, suggests developing this unconditional friendliness with ourselves. So, and this means having an unbiased relationship with all parts of our beings. So in the context of working with pain, this means making an intimate, compassionate, open heart with ourselves, and being able to touch that pain in a way that's gentle and kind. And when I think about these three different aspects, the compassion, the mindfulness, and the insight, you can think about it a little bit like a flower. So we do want to try to create an environment that is skillful and cultivate the seeds that help this flower grow, and that's the compassion. And we also do want to deal with what is actually growing in front of us, the flower that's in front of us. And then we can start to notice, oh, wow, this is changing and this is shifting. So the research is backing this up, that indeed being kind to ourselves is not just, as some folks have said, being nice to yourself is kind of woo-woo. Now, all of us know that this is not the case because we've perhaps explored this at a deeper level, but the science is backing it up. Dr. Kristen Neff, who is a professor and the co-founder of the Center for Mindful Self-Compassion, has found that through her research, specifically self-compassion helps to regulate the nervous system. So instead of, when we get into a place of fight, flight, or freeze, and we're able to be with that in a way that's compassionate, we're actively deactivating the threat defense system and activating a sense of care. And so endorphins are released, which helps us reduce the stress and create a feeling of safety and security within ourselves. And what does this look like actually putting into practice? Well, there are a couple of ways we can plant the seeds. So on the cushion, this might look like a loving kindness meditation, which we did a little bit earlier today. May I be safe. May I be happy, healthy, and live with ease. And personally, I've really enjoyed this meditation. I've really enjoyed this practice, even if I'm outside walking around, because I can't see people's faces. And sometimes it's easy to imagine that the expression they're making is not loving. So for me, sending that out has been very helpful. But also when I've needed to receive a little extra loving kindness, traditionally the loving kindness meditation is sending loving kindness to ourselves, to a benefactor, then to someone we have a little bit of difficulty with, and then to all beings everywhere. When I've needed a little extra support, it's also nice to imagine a group of people in your life, everybody you've really loved who's supported you, and imagine them saying these things to you, which has been very supportive in those moments. I also really enjoy this idea that Barry brought up last week, which is meditating on the 3 jewels and seeking support from both the Buddha, the Sangha, and the Dharma, and letting that meditation cause support and ease and cultivate a sense of care within ourselves. I briefly want to mention a story that I always kind of teeter-totter on. And it's a story from the Buddha. It's very striking to me. And it's the story that many of us know as the mustard seed. And so when I think of seeking support, story of the mustard seed comes to mind, but at moments where I've felt really in my feelings, it's felt a little brash. So I'll share it with you, but take it with a grain of salt is what I would offer. The story of the mustard seed is that there was a young woman who had lost her son. Her son had passed away, and she was very understandably distraught. She was going around carrying this child in her arms. And she found the Buddha. People had recommended, hey, head to the Buddha. He's a physician. Maybe he can help. And she goes and she says, I want you to heal my son. I want you to heal my son. And the Buddha says, I want to help. First, if you will collect some mustard seeds, and I want you to collect these mustard seeds from houses. And from these houses, they can only give you the mustard seed if no one there has died. The woman goes around to the town, and all these people are very willing to give the mustard seeds, except for when she gets to the part that says, "But no one there, has anyone in your home died?" And everyone has stories about people in their families, people in their lives who have passed away. So she comes back to the Buddha, very moved by this whole journey and venture that she's been on, and says, "Wow, I see that this is not just me who's gone through loss, that there are others who have experienced this hardship as well." And so, yes, we want to continue to develop this loving kindness for ourselves, but it can also be very healing when the moment is right to seek support and to be around other people who are also going through something that can be relatable and can be a place to share that burden. And so off the cushion, this for me just looks like a couple of things I'll mention, which is patience, being generous with myself, and a little mantra that I've carried with me is um, change is inevitable, change isn't a mistake. You didn't do anything wrong. And I find that very helpful in those moments. And then as we head to the next section, cultivating mindfulness. So this is an opportunity really on the cushion to sit with and open. And I want to use the word open. Someone recently taught me the word titrate, which is being used in trauma work, I'm told, which means we're opening to our felt experience in a way that is respectful and gentle to ourselves. We're not demanding that we open to what can be very overwhelming, but instead inviting and being with what is in a way that is kind. And on the cushion, this can look like a noting practice. That's been very helpful for me as far as when I've settled down and I'm in a place of concentration and just noting what is coming up, whether that's frustration, grief, anger, and then and then noting it and then dropping that note back down into the body so that there's a real felt sensation of, oh, how does this feel? And noticing if there's any extra that's getting added onto that. I know Sharon tells this story, I think it's Sylvia Borstein, who talks about how she went to a, a Jewish gathering where they were having traditional foods. I think a lot of you know this. And traditionally, there's gefilte fish, and you add a little horseradish to it. And the young child said, "Why would you make something that's gross even worse?" So, how can we notice in times with ourselves when we're adding on some extra that's just can be a little painful? It can be a little painful. And so, off of the cushion, what does this mean in our mindfulness practice? Off the cushion, this is an opportunity to really notice when we're feeling unanchored and to take a moment to come back to the felt experiences. So sometimes I'll even note aloud when I'm walking through the house if I start to notice that there's a lot of movement in the mind. Oh, keys. Oh, door. And even this labeling, while seems very basic, can be an opportunity to come back into the senses and out of the narrative that's going. And then finally, how can we invite some insight? And on the cushion, something that's come up recently that give a little nod to my dad that he shared with me are the 5 remembrances. And so as we look at the very nature of impermanence, again, not as a philosophy, but as a practice, how can we reflect on these um, and not be shocked by the fact that all things are going to come to an end that are in a conditioned form, but instead continue to acknowledge these truths and instead develop a preciousness or a sense of reverence for them. So invite you to close your eyes since there's no PowerPoint here, and maybe just listen and let them wash over you. So the Buddha suggested that everyone, all people, lay and ordained, reflect on these daily. I am subject to aging, have not gone beyond aging. This is the first fact that one should reflect on often, whether one is a woman or a man, lay or ordained. I am subject to illness, have not gone beyond illness. I am subject to death, have not gone beyond death. I will grow different, separate from all things that are dear and appealing to me. I am the owner of my actions, heir to my actions, born of my actions, related through my actions, and have my actions as my arbiter. Whatever I do, for good or evil, to that will I fall heir. So reflecting on this doesn't always make me feel warm and fuzzy, but it does remind me of the preciousness. A quote from a Hindu text, the Mahabharata, one of the characters says, "People see death all around them, but do not believe they're going to die themselves. This is the greatest wonder." And so off the cushion, this can look like finding, and again, it's a real balance of acknowledging that change is suffering and also the beauty and the impermanent nature of things. There's a form of art called wabi sabi. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. And it's a Japanese art form that celebrates the very imperfections, the inconsistencies, and the impermanent nature. And if you want to give it a Google or in the slideshow when you receive this, there are bowls that have been broken, that have been glued back together with gold. And it's really very stunning and very moving. And so finally, just to piggyback off of that, when we look at the beauty in the very impermanent nature of things, Thich Nhat Hanh reflects on looking at a flowers and says, flowers decompose, but knowing this does not prevent us from loving flowers. In fact, we are able to love them more because we know how to treasure them while they are still alive. If we learn to look at flowers in a way that impermanence is revealed to us when it dies, we will not suffer. Impermanence is more than an idea. It's a practice to help us touch reality. And so I will leave you just with this final quote from William Shakespeare. Like as the waves make towards the pebbled shore, so do our minutes hasten to their end, each changing place with that which goes. In sequent toil, all forwards do contend. And so we're left with the only thing that matters, our actions. As Mary Oliver says, tell me, what is your plan to do with your one wild and precious life? Thank you all for your patience and for just enjoying the face instead of the PowerPoint behind it. Love to hear from you and any of your thoughts.